All right. So welcome to another Artist Happy Hour series. Thanks to Touchstone for making these happen. Again, these have been kind of one of the great things of the pandemic, of just being able to do these artist talks. It's kind of absurd that no one's done this until this kind of necessity came up. But it's really been great to be able to talk to artists around the country and get people from around the country to see these different artists talk about their work, as kind of most of the time you weren't able to see any of them unless you were kind of at the center or wherever they were giving lectures. So it's been really great to have these. And Touchstone has been able to make these happen for us, which has been really kind of a wonderful, again, the biggest blessing out of this whole thing. And I think it's kind of helped keep me sane and be able to have these conversations during a time where, you know, a lot of the communities within the arts are not able to happen right now. So thank you all for being a part of it and tuning in. So today we've got Travis Townsend joining us. We are really excited to have him on here. I don't even know what kind of artist he considers himself. He works in wood a lot. I was lucky enough to meet him at Aeromont. Was that 2 years ago now?
Yeah, year and a half.
Something like that. So I'm really excited to have him on here. I'm going to kind of just let him introduce himself because he can talk about himself far better than I can. So welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, Travis and Lindsay and the rest of the Touchstone crew. This should be, look forward to this. So let me know at the end or at any point if anyone has any questions. My initial plan was to have this parked in my studio, but my Wi-Fi is not, it's a little spotty there, so I had to do a virtual studio behind me here. I thought what I would start with would be just a brief kind of history of where I come from and what I've done and who's really influenced my work. At the risk of making my own work look less interesting, I'm going to show lots of other people's work. So I thought I'd start there. I'll move through that stuff pretty quick. If you have any questions about titles or sizes or anything like that, you can ask me that at any time, I guess, or at the end, whatever works best. So Travis, you want me to just share my lecture now?
Yeah, if you want to jump right into it, we can get it moving.
All right. So this is an image of my studio. Lots of things happen all at once. Typically things are being made, 5 to 10 things at any one time being made or cut apart. And even though all the works start off as drawings and ideas for things, once I start making them, once they're three-dimensional, you know, things change. They're not always as interesting as I initially planned them to be, or they alter, or something about them is you just want to change. You just don't find it as interesting once it's three-dimensional. So then I move parts around, cut things apart. And usually it's not until I've nearly killed something that they start to get interesting. So for me, when I'm trying to find, because people always ask me, when do you know if it's complete? And so for me, it's that balance between having enough formal clarity that it looks like, you know, intentional, but at the same time, enough loose ends that it doesn't look so tight, somewhere between clarity and disintegration. So anyway, this is a picture of the studio, things going on and all the stuff laying about. So there's this thing in progress. Here's the finished version with sort of this gestural extension thing happening here. My goal is really to make these things interesting, unexpected from all sides. So there's interiors to peek into, remnants of notes and drawings and things like that. My hope is that when someone looks at this from across a gallery, it has a lot of formal interest, but I hope that it also allows for continual surprises as people move around the things, inspect them, look at them maybe on a second or third visit, or live with the things, to really try and have these things be these, have a lot of history in them but at the same time still be a bit of a conundrum. Like a lot of things you can reference without really being anything too specific at the same time. So I'm trying to find that balance there. I'm keeping the wrong button. So these are some recent works from that were completed last fall and photographed. Even though this thing probably began, parts of it were worked on 15 years prior, with different things getting added and taken apart, cut in half, reworked. Parts of it get orphaned and other parts become components to other sculptures. Surfaces. I think of these things in a way, it's kind of like these three-dimensional drawings, three-dimensional paintings. And these paintings, this is a 4 foot by 4 foot drawing / painting. These actually really evolved out of drawing and the surfaces I was putting on the sculptures. And so, and this one actually began at that pentaculum where we met Travis at Aramont. So this is one of my new favorite paintings. I made this last year. Who knew that we'd be, I think it's kind of indicative of where we are, right? This little dead bird alone in the plaza with some sort of disease rifling through him. Maybe that's where we are in the world. I think of them as kind of funny. Maybe someone else might think of them as a bit morbid. So, again, lots of layering of the surface and cutting into the surface and masking things and then going back in and reorienting things. I started off as a small Quaker boy. I looked pretty good for being 150 years old, I guess. But no, this was from like 1976 where my family dressed me up for the bicentennial. Right. Anyway, so I'm from Southeast PA. As a kid, I did a lot of skateboarding. This was one of my first skateboards, the Lucero Schmidt stick. I loved cutting the boards, altering them, building ramps. I wasn't a very good skateboarder. It's not like I was good at it necessarily, but I loved being with my friends, building, making these sort of, inventing with pipes and plywood and whatever you could scrounge up to build ramps and things to grind on and things like that. And it took me a long time to realize when I was in college that making art could be as much fun as building forts, as building skateboard ramps. So that was a real big aha moment when I was probably still maybe even all the way to a junior in college as an undergrad, realizing that, oh wait, I don't have to make art that looks like, whatever painting we were studying or whatever like that. It can be these other things. And so that freedom of building kind of intuitively, and then later worrying about if it's decent as art, was something that really reminded me of all these times as a kid building stuff. And then, in high school and early college, I loved Salvador Dali and all the weird references. Then in college, learning about more art history, and this Jackson Pollock quote always stuck with me. Painting is a state of being, self-discovery. Every good artist paints what he is. Of course, it doesn't have to be paint, and of course, it doesn't have to be he. And maybe it's a little bit old school modernist, but this still rings true, at least for me. Wendell Castle's work was pretty exciting for a whole group of us at Kutztown University when we were taking furniture making classes. So this is like a 5 or 6 foot tall sculpture, well, furniture, but it's like a carved piece of wood with painted finish, and then the maple cabinet is inset into that. And that was a particularly exciting time with me and my peers building things that were weird but functional. And that was quite a lot of fun. And trips to the Wharton Eschrick Museum we made as a student group, and then later I'd spend a lot of time there. This is on the edge of Chester County in Pennsylvania. Although, even though that's in the county where I grew up, I didn't realize it was there until college. And the thing that's cool about this guy's house, he's no longer living, but this house evolved over the course of like 40 years as he altered it and changed it and lived in it. This is this spiral staircase that heads up to a small bedroom upstairs. And I loved, and I still love when I go to this place, that every surface, well, a lot of it's made out of salvaged lumber, but then every surface has this artistic treatment to it. Even the light pull switches are like little carved monkeys, and there's hardly any right angles in the place. And it was really, really kind of inspiring place to think about art as a way of life rather than a product. And so these are all these things percolating through my head when I was like, 22 or whatever. H.C. Westerman, I love the title of this piece, Memorial to the Idea of Man, If He Was an Idea. And, just sort of bizarro woodworking with his signature death ships, because as a World War II, he was in the Navy in World War II, and he witnessed a kamikaze attack on the ship, and the sailors were thrown overboard, and sharks were eating, and so he had this motif of death throughout many of his works, which are kind of bizarro and poetic at the same time. So really love this guy's work. So here's some of the things I was making towards the end of undergraduate at Kutztown University. I was an art education major, but more of a de facto furniture making major as well, since I was taking all the classes as all the craft kids. And so these were hers and his end tables for a couple outside of Philadelphia that had commissioned me, where there's like secret drawers for furniture. Secret drawers for jewelry in hers. And his, he wanted a place for magazine and for his gun. So magazines and guns, jewelry, stereotypical. But so this, you can totally see my indebtedness to someone like Wendell Castle. This idea that, it looks like sculpture, but behaves like furniture. And it was pretty exciting because audiences knew how to react to this stuff. They knew what it was supposed to do, but then you could kind of wow them with form and technique. And then the things started to get a little bit more, less functional, more ceremonial rather than practical. So this is a cabinet, a small cabinet box, like, 8 by 10 that you open up, and it's got this image of this bird inside, and it's got these bird-like legs, and it looks a little bit like a birdhouse. And so at the end of undergrad and hanging around the Kutztown University wood shop after I had left there, I was selling some things. And I thought, oh man, I've got this stuff figured out right now. And then of course my work changed a bit. But this is another work that some couple bought. I don't know why. They must have weird taste. So it's a cabinet, right? Called it the one night stand cabinet or one night cabinet or something like that. And if my dad is watching, Dad, remember we shared this weird apartment after I graduated? It had this weird pink tile. Yeah, there it is in our fine pink bathroom. And then, look, there you are, Lindsay. Summer of, 97, I spent the whole summer with these weirdos living in a rundown house by a swamp in Northwest New Jersey at Peters Valley Craft Center. And we, we're just making art all summer long. And it was really that summer at Peters Valley that cemented my confidence. Not that I thought, oh, I'm really great now, but this idea that, because I was meeting all these people, all these visiting instructors and assisting in the wood shop with all the furniture making classes. And it made me realize, hey, I can do this. These people can do it. I can have a life in the arts too. Because I wasn't sure still at this point. The next summer I went to Penland, which is pretty, it's another one of these great craft schools like the many other ones we've mentioned tonight, like Touchstone, Aramont, these other tucked away, really amazing places. Took a woodworking class with a guy named Randy Scholl. We made some big chairs and stuck them out in the llama field. Randy Scholl was pretty influential to me, helping him out in his studio. He would cut things apart. Even after they'd been exhibited, he didn't like them. He'd change them, and he'd gob on tons of acrylic and carve through the paint. So he really used the paint as not just a surface, but almost like a solid, it had this thickness to it that he carved through. And that's really what made these things pretty interesting. Also took a workshop with Bob Trotman at Penland. So I had a great summer at Penland, you know, took all these classes for free, essentially. And these are pretty cool, these metaphorical. I mean, you know, they're not really drowning, right? But we see the floor as a stand-in for like quicksand or water. And these figures are just, you know, they can't keep up. Their society's weighing them down. So his work has all these kinds of pretty important social messages. While taking his class, I made this sort of weird self-portrait vessel thing. Then I went to grad school right after that. And this was my graduate committee. Alan Rosenbaum on the left, Bill Hammersley was my main professor in furniture, and Rebecca Hutchinson on the right. And they were a really great group of people, among others who I was with in grad school, but these were my committee members for my MFA committee, and they helped guide me, helped, you know, calm me down when I had weird ideas that were probably not going to help me graduate, and they challenged me a lot. And the first week, Rebecca Hutchinson, this is her work. This is some of her more recent work, where she's taking paper clay and twigs and sticks and stuff like that. She makes some pretty spectacular stuff. But it was like the first week of class, and she's looking around, or the first week of the semester, when my very first semester at VCU was a 2-year program, so it was pretty quick. She looks around the studio and she sees all my parts, right? And all the sketches and all these things. And she's like, Travis, your studio and the way you're making these things are far more interesting than the thing you're making. Because I was making these things out of all these component parts and then putting some sort of skin on it to make it look unified. And she was basically saying, oh, your process and the studio itself is far more interesting than these finished products you're making. And so this focus on process really got me going and really took the work in a different direction. Maybe it was heading there on its own, but certainly the committee encouraged this change, and it was really, really exciting time, where the works before looked like sculptures that had a function. Now the function is these metaphorical functions, and of course these things are useless. So, and a lot of architectural references as well, and little things you could peek into. So this is all the work I sort of made my first year there at VCU. Cutting things apart, sticking them back together, no longer working on just one thing. Because previously I'd made a sketch of something I thought might be interesting, and then I'd try and make that thing, and then I'd try and put a painted finish on that thing. Now things are happening much more less planned, and I think gave the work a lot more life. And it's a lot of fun to make too. So all of these things are still sort of derivations of tool forms and architectural forms, and still, again, coming from the point of really my main sort of philosophical development was through studio craft, thinking about vessel and all the stuff that happened in the craft media after World War II through the 90s. This are the things I was really thinking about heading into grad school. So you still definitely see the vessel aesthetic as at least a starting point for these things. It's at least the starting point. One of my main influences among Martin Puryear, he's probably influenced probably half the sculptors out there, and probably anybody working in wood is pretty amazed by his work. So Martin Puryear, so great, right? And these things are pretty interesting, of course, but they're interesting to me because they suggest so many things, so many possibilities, but never really pinpoints exactly what they are. So always been a huge fan of these works. And then Richard Deacon, which in a way is similar to Puryear, same age, same sort of generation, except Richard Deacon is British. But, using the wood, and then he's got the glue dripping out here. So he's makes some pretty amazing work, of course. Another person I was able to study with in grad school is this guy, Howard Rosati, who, when I was taking his class, he was trying out all his ideas for his book on us. And this was the best class ever, right? Sort of essentially hearing the first draft of his book. And this idea of still rooting my work in the vessel still worked for me, and thinking about a lot of his ideas were a part of that. Carl Berkemer, he's in Portland, Oregon. This work of his is probably from about 10 years old, but he had recently graduated from VCU in the furniture making program and was also hanging around the studio. So he was almost like another professor that I was studying with, or I should say a much more advanced peer. And so there's a really interesting vibe there at VCU at the time. And I'm still there, I guess, but different people. But so lots of influences. At VCU, I met my wife. This is some more of her recent work. And her colors, I steal her colors. Any leftover color, you'll see these blues, greens, pinks, they end up in my work too, just in various more sloppy forms. So all this time, and the reason I mention all this is because when you're in that formative stage, and you're still thinking through everything, and everything's still in flux, being around all these inspiring, hardworking, creative people really does cinch things up. And I'm still working through these ideas years and years and years later. And really, when it comes down to it, I think the reason I make my work is for me to then have conversations with my peers. And if it gets in the shows, that's awesome. If it gets grants or gets you a job or they sell, wonderful, right? But really, I want to talk with other artists, and this is the way I communicate about what I think is interesting or beautiful or weird. So these are some images from my MFA show in 2000. Then I moved to I moved to Penland for a residency at Penland School of Crafts after grad school. And then eventually we moved to Kentucky when my wife got a job at EKU. And these are some of the things that I was making. 2006, 2007. So the scale of these things have gotten a little bit bigger. You still see the interest in the tool references, the architectural references. The clamps, when I'm building things, sometimes the process of building them just stays. Some bent lamination stuff, some basic joinery. It's like all the fancy stuff I learned in all my furniture making classes, I've kind of abandoned and gone back to just dowel joints, bent lamination, basic carving. So when I'm installing these things, and later I included a big drawing with this one, but this first derivation of it didn't have a drawing. But I'm using the string almost like as a gestural line. I want these things to look like, I don't know, like here's the blueprint that doesn't really tell you what it is of the thing that you're not really sure what it is. But I like the relationship back and forth between these. This is one I'd like to have back. Sometimes you keep cutting things apart too many times until you've killed it. This is one that maybe I shouldn't have kept cutting, because looking back on this image, that's a good one. I had this in a faculty show, and some student wrote down here on the paper, "This sucks." And I wrote, "I know." I thought that was pretty funny. So starting to include drawings into the work here. This is from like 10 years ago. Sticking these things up on the wall, or I should say, this thing looks like it's making a projection of all these things on the wall, sort of morphing these small objects into large gestural things with almost like a clothesline on it, with drawings on the wall to make it more of like a, to fill up the whole room as an installation, to really command that kind of space. And then it's nice when places let you, paint walls and draw all over their place, which is pretty fun. This is from a show in Texas. The little ladders, the little chairs that I include in the work, in a way, it seems kind of playful at first, like a little dollhousey. So I wasn't sure when I started including these in the works because I thought, oh, maybe that's just too dumb. Like, is that too dopey? Putting these little ladders, little chairs and things. But what I like about it is it changes the scale. Like this thing from across the room might look like some weird, I don't know, piece of equipment or some weird tool. But then once you have these little scale references of ladder and chair, then they become these models, or you can imagine yourself much smaller and looking through the spaces as if they're rooms for people. And I go back and forth on that, but oftentimes these things will have these little furniture pieces, chairs, ladders, things like that in there. Again, one of my main goals is to have these things interesting from across the room, but then once you get up close to it, you're noticing all these different things. You're inspecting the insides, the undersides. Some things have things you can open up. I guess still leftover furniture references to, handling an object. So thinking of this weird device as like it's drawing this cloud that's been bricked up. I think that's kind of funny. So surface of this thing, right? It's another view of that show where these things are connected to the walls. So this thing has got this big spout on it, like it's reeling this thing in. And then of course it's like not touching. And I know this sounds dopey, but like I'm doing these little things and I think it's funny. It's like on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. This is the dopiest reference ever to Michelangelo's work. Where the image of God is reaching out for Adam and they haven't quite touched yet. This is like, oh. But of course the thing that this thing is trying to reel in is like this weird little thing with boobs on it and a tank guarding it. So I'm hoping that when people look at these objects, they inspect these things. And I'm leaving some things open certainly, but hopefully there's enough in these things to look at them from a process point of view, a formal point of view, lots of hints about meaning. So I'm trying to layer on lots of these ways to approach the work. This one has these like little clusters and this big sort of like tree ring cross section. And then within there, we've got these little birds with their X'd out eyes and these little tanks, just comical kind of things stolen from really pop culture, like of the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, right? Got the little tanks as a symbol for like blundering evil, and the birds would be like, innocence, but it's been killed. Aren't I fun? Aren't this a fun talk? Paintings. This one's in the show right now that Travis installed. Collaborative work. I've done a bunch of collaborations with my friend Brandon Smith. This is the first one where we made this giant book called the Book of the Triumph, and we came up with this big fake propaganda statement. And we thought it was really funny, where these you'd be flipping through this book of all these images that don't really make sense to witness this kind of pathetic scene of these cows pulling this chunk of material, which led to a second. Oh, let me get the image right. Which led to a second one here at the Sculpture Center in Cleveland, where we've got these sort of cows methodically and pulling this piece. I don't know what this is, some sort of low-tech space junk across the floor. And then paradise, they're pulling it to paradise, which is this skull. Thinking about sort of the myths we're told ourselves in terms of like what America is, what being a man is, like all these things. And sort of just riffing on some of those things and working them into the work is a kind of humorous, but maybe poignant. And this one is actually still a piece of furniture, right? Coat rack. It was commissioned for a coat rack show. Opening it up, I guess you could stick something in here, but mostly it just houses this drawing and the little ladder and the chair and whatever this little thing is here. But I like this one, and this one you can live with. It's a little easier to live with than most of my works. And so this one is a newer variation of an older work where I've reformatted things. I do that quite a bit. And the titles often hint at this process. Something might be called Thrice Made Device or Third Permutation of, some sort of vessel. Cutting out vessel shapes, right, out of plywood, bent lamination, sketches. Again, this thing's starting a tool reference with a vessel inside, or, forms a vessel, but has this kind of tool-like thing. Here's another one using the parts that friends, like this is left over from, I think, Jessica Knapp. She's now the editor of Ceramics Monthly, but her husband sent me a whole bunch of her unused parts from grad school, and then I kept them for years, and they worked their way into a few pieces. Little bits of trees, little things that I just collect often will end up in these things. But more often than that, things will get added to something as well, then cut off, and then they become something else. This thing has since gone through many changes, but this is the first version of this. So this big, I call it the Love Boat Abandoned, which of course just makes me want to hum the Love Boat theme. So this work, has the gestural quality, the drawings, the interior, the exterior thing, the process of creation all showing right on its sleeve. But it's this kind of thing that's hard to plan for. So I often sketch these things, but then when they get to this point, it's kind of exciting for me. It's like, ooh, this got to someplace that I couldn't anticipate just with drawing. So I'm often starting with drawings, building these things, but then the actual process of making things takes it, for me anyway, to a place that's more interesting than it would have otherwise been. So sort of this gesture that kind of relates to me of like a tool handle, a ladle, maybe the Big Dipper constellation kind of thing. This is the flip side of this one. Franz West is an artist who's no longer alive, but is really interesting in that he makes these weird pieces of furniture, right? That's him sitting on his furniture. It's like a sculpture, but it acts as a piece of furniture. So it interestingly throws the viewer off because, you're used to seeing things just as standalone furniture or as sculpture. And then this thing occupies that weird middle ground. Here's some of his other works that are just so amazingly weird and sloppy, but beautiful all at the same time. And if you would have asked me if this was good art when I was like in high school, I would have said, oh God, no, look at that crap. Now it's like, oh yeah, that stuff's amazing. And you can see, right? You go see a Franz West show and then you come home and you start splattering paint on everything. This is a shot from a few years ago at a show here in Lexington, combining new sculptures with new paintings. Since this show, I've reworked this one, and this one, so things have changed a little bit since then. Little doodles from hanging out with my kids, sometimes work their way into the studio, sometimes the kids will put notes on things. And it's not as if I'm really trying to highlight their work necessarily, but I use it almost like as another layer of the history. Like if you stop somewhere and you maybe at a park somewhere and you see the layers of marks in an old picnic table. I've always liked that. It's like it's showing its history. So I feel like my work has all those kind of demarcations of its past. And then, like I said at the beginning, some of these works have been kicking around for 15, 20 years until they actually get finished and exhibited, which is kind of silly, I know. And so it looks like last year I made, 20 sculptures. It's just that, no, I just finished the things that I started a long, long time ago. So this is one of my like faves. It's quite like this one. Show with Felicia a year or so ago. That's her necklaces in the background. And JJ, this is just that same demo I did when I was visiting RCU guys, just concentric ring, cutting it out. There's probably prettier ways to make this shape, and there's more, solid wood would have that kind of, what's the right word, organic or, prestige to the furniture quality of things. But I love the look of plywood. It sort of speaks to construction, low tech, and it's already layered, and then I'm layering it more, so it almost builds up like you're thinking of like layers and layers and layers, almost sedimentary rock maybe. And then one of my little chairs here to give it this weird scale shift, and these little unfired clay bricks, as if this little person, who you can imagine sitting there has walled themselves off. Maybe that's a bit of a metaphor. So I call this Ship of Self with 3 empty chairs. Another collaboration with my friend Brandon Smith. He's got this weird painting of Ahab, which is just a weird painting. And then, you can follow the lines of the waves down here. And then we had these like little boats leading up to it. So a lot of times we'll have these installations, but sometimes, like with this show, is more like a 2-person show, but the works had a lot of connections. Same thing with this show. This is also, we built it as Smith Townsend Collaborative, but really it was, not to oversimplify it, but it was my sculptures connected via string or due to positioning with his paintings. And so he's painting on this flat material like that, like those wall decals you get called fatheads, if anyone still sells those or buys those. They stick right to the wall. And so these things don't even have a thickness. They don't come off the wall at all. So they have a nice quality that they're so flat, and these things are so lumpy. But I thought they were pretty cool. They're positioned together. Like I'd have my sculpture here, and then some of his paint, as if it's spilling out of here, and then a little chair like contemplating this weird meteor like potato thing on the wall. And we're setting these things up. We just think it's so funny. And then everyone else comes to the show and no one thinks our jokes are funny. Here's another one we did a few years ago. Again, taking our own elements. The big thing is his paper mache blob, and then you can see my elements, and then some of his drawing things on there. And this one's from last year. This place called Art Fields. It's a big art event, and I didn't realize where they were going to put us. We had this piece, it was called Ship Failing, and it's sort of about how, you've got this sad-looking, moonlander-looking thing on this big, pathetic lump of rock, and then all the chairs are empty, and sort of thinking about, the stuff men build, I don't know. And then when we got to the event, the place where the exhibition would take place, it's a museum dedicated to this astronaut who was a favorite son of that town in South Carolina who died in the Challenger explosion in '86. And then we thought, oh my gosh, they put our work in this museum that's dedicated to this man and this epic failure of technology. And then we just thought it looked so insensitive. But we already had it. So we went along with it anyway. And it's about 16 feet long, a big 16-foot long by 8-foot long platform with this big chunky thing all at one end. And then there's like this little escape hole down on this side. Again, one of the little chairs there. That's the close-up of this. And you can see how, again, I'm taking apart from another piece and working it into this one. And so his big lumpy form is more, he treats it like a big three-dimensional painting. You can see all his layers on here, right? Hooked into it. So this is an exhibition from about this time last year of new sculpture and drawing at the Lexington Art League here in Lexington. It's long, what I consider kind of a three-dimensional drawing. And I had all, often I'll require my drawing one students to do all this stuff in their sketchbook. And then, of course, the students who never pick up their sketchbooks are the students who often don't put much time into it. So I had all these barely used sketchbooks sitting around the studio with all these sort of poorly drawn hands and eyes and things like that. That sounds mean because I have so many amazing students there at EKU. But sometimes, you get something. So then I'm cutting out these little eyeballs, and I had all this big pile of eyeballs. I was sticking them in the works. So it's like found eyes. And then this piece, Lindsay, is like from when I took a blacksmithing class with John Rays a million years ago. And then these parts just linger around the studio, linger around the studio, linger around the studio. The big painting that's very sculptural comes off the wall. It's about 4 feet wide. This one hangs on the wall. It's got parts left over from like my first toys as a kid, one of my first train sets as a kid, leaving that in as a reference, clamps, reference to the building process, all the demarcations about where things are going to get cut. Then sometimes I don't cut it there, so there's all these leftover marks, my little tanks still hanging out and things. So I was pleased with the show because I liked the way that the flat work worked with the sculptures. This one has a few leftover parts from other people too, where someone might be in the studio and they might doodle something, and I'll be like, I might keep that, and that ends up. So that weird little cloud drawing is actually Brandon Smith's that ended up on one of my pieces of plywood. Then I worked into my thing. So they're like these collections of all these different moments. Now I don't expect the viewers to necessarily know that or even care, but for me, it's just part of like this community of ideas. Again, a weird mix of pieces of paneling that I'd pulled down out of the old garage, and the kids had drawn on them years ago, and then there's still remnants in there, like finding weird cave drawings. I mean, kind of, but not really. More dead birds. This is another one I began at Pentaculum, Travis, and finally finished last year. Been making these big 4-foot by 4-foot panel paintings, leaving them leaning, just to really emphasize the fact that they're a chunk of plywood. Vessel of Manifest Destiny, exclamation mark, third permutation. Obviously, this vessel is not going to get the job done. It's quite pathetic and filled with holes and taped together and clamped together and lashed together. But I think it, I think this is a good one. I like this one. This one was mildly interesting, and then I cut it apart, and then seeing all the areas on the inside that I hadn't addressed were more interesting than the exterior that I was purposely trying to make look interesting. So that was one of those surprises that happen when you make it, as opposed to just design it and build it. I'm making it as I go. Last year, a 2-person show with Felicia. So her brooches and pins and things, my sculptures. This was down at Aramont. And nice polished concrete floors there. Since it was a 2-person show, I put in 2 little chairs there on the one piece. That's my crew here. Felicia, who I'd mentioned, and Keaton and Josie and Evie. Toledo Museum of Art. My wife's from Toledo. So I took some studio pics last night when I realized my Wi-Fi wouldn't allow me to have my talk in my studio. So there's my touchdown sticker right on my old bandsaw. This is the pic I posted earlier of this kind of big contraption looking thing on this base. most of this stuff on this wall's finished. This thing has never gotten finished. That sculpture needs finished. My gosh, it's been sitting there like that for 2 years now. So since the mid-March, my studio, well, really, maybe some people's studio practice dramatically changes due to this pandemic. Mine didn't really, except, you know, I'm not a guy who clocks in at 8 in the morning and works 8 hours and clocks out. I go in after the kids are in bed and tinker around, or when there's time during the day, I might cut something and rearrange something or paint something. So it's always like these little moments of studio activity. And then usually the bigger pushes are between like 10 and midnight. But often I'll make something and then I need a few days just to look at it, just to see if it's still, you know, proceeding in the right direction before I then commit to, you know, attaching it permanently. So this thing here and this one are new since this spring. And although this drawing, wait, let me get this image back up. This thing, I know it's a little weird, but when I was playing around with this thing yesterday, is this idea of, because I have a wall of tools, you can see behind me here, and you know, just like any old timer, you know, you trace tools so you know where things go. And so I like the idea that this very tool-like looking sculpture would have more or less this outline of where it would go. And then from there, I added things. I kind of like the lower part of the drawing better than the top. But that's kind of, if you're in my studio right now, you'd be looking at these half-formed things kicking around. And there's my wall of finished sculptures that need to be exhibited or bought. Anyone out there? Right. So anyway, that's sort of the images I have prepared to share with you as a way of explaining the roadmap of where I've been and who's influenced me and what I'm working on now.
Great. I loved seeing your work. I mean, I've seen some of it. I was at Edinburgh when you and Felicia had a show there together, and I actually set that show up.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
This is awesome to kind of like, looking at your presentation, it's so hard to see how much is going on in some of those works. Like, I mean, you talked about how there's all these little moments going on inside, outside of kind of your work, which is, I mean, that's like the thing your work is so, I mean, playful is like the best word I can come up with.
Yeah.
You just want to you want to search that thing. You want to find all those little drawings. You want to see what's going on inside, outside, because you cover everything. You know, it's like maybe it's the reworking of it. I don't know, but it's like it's so much better in real life, but it's still great images. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm hoping it's better in real life. But yeah, thanks. Yeah, I know playful is like the right word. I don't know. Depends on who's using it and how. Like when people say whimsical, I'm like, oh, whimsical. But then I'm like, I get it. It's kind of whimsical, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really sticks out to me about your entire presentation is maybe it's because I'm like a ceramics turd. You know, I come from like the ceramics background. It's like the functionality, like all of these, like even you talking about it, like, oh, this could be this. It's like it's always a functional object. I mean, this is like a broad question for everybody in this group. Like, what is it about human nature that wants to assign functionality to objects? You know, I don't know, like even I struggle with that in my own work all the time. It's like, oh, like this thing, why not just let it be skull? Why does it have to like, and like watching shows, you see people talking like, oh, this could be used for this. You know what I mean? It's just meant to live as, it's like a fascinating thing. It's human nature. I don't know. I think it's like we love to use things. It definitely craft background, so like wood, ceramics, like metals, I feel like it's all kind of based in that like functional realm, so people love to assign weird things to it. I don't know.
Yeah, and because probably like you, my sort of development came through that, And so it felt to me at first like it was a big diss to my roots to abandon a function. Probably maybe the same thing painters thought in the 30s or in the 40s when they've given up imagery, abstract, but I still see it to me as very much rooted in that. But to me, I find it a little bit more, I find it interesting that there's all these possibilities with the forms and even how they're put together, that they could communicate some function, but at the same time, you quickly realize this is a totally useless item. This thing has no practical use whatsoever, unless you're like propping a door or something. So I like that back and forth, that it got all these functional associations, but at the same time, I mean, it's really not doing anything practical for humanity in terms of a simple like explanation of what it is. And so I like
I feel like there's just like that thing, I don't know, I feel the same way. Like I'll make a piece and I'm like, oh, I gotta put a spout on it so it's a functional pot, which no one in their real life is going to use this thing, or it doesn't really serve a function, but there's something that feels good about it,
Yeah.
I don't know, it feels good to me. Like I love functional. I mean, it's like easy, it's like a more relatable thing when it's like a item that is something we use every day. I think it just like brings art and kind of connects people to things a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah.
Accurate,
And it can also, I'm thinking of like Richard Notkin's teapots that, no one's probably actually using for a lot of tea, but
I hope not.
But, it does help you focus your idea in terms of, it locates it more in the history of clay, and it makes the scale seem appropriate, even though it's not practical. So
yeah,
I guess there's still vestiges of those kinds of ideas in there.
Yeah, man, I love how you throw the little chairs and how that really, it's kind of like throws you for a loop with the scale of the work. It's already like pretty big work, but then you throw these little mini chairs in there and then all of a sudden your head goes to this space of like, oh, this thing is huge. Like this is like a sketch of something larger or something. And like, I really appreciate that, like, I don't know, God, I hate the like fantasy kind of world of like your work. I mean, you reference like, oh, this is like a piece of space junk,
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, again, it kind of comes back to that playful, it's a narrative with I think your work is really, it's got like a whole, I mean, your work's got a ton of narrative going on in it, with
I see that, but I could see also maybe not know, I could see someone looking at it and not thinking about narrative, just thinking about process and form. So I feel like maybe you can go back and forth on it. Lately, I've been thinking about the photographs of the sculpture that I want to turn into drawing. So like come full circle back to drawing, like a drawing of the original idea. You make the thing, photograph the thing, and then you make a drawing that's kind of realistic based off the thing. Some of them in the maybe pinhole camera. Something.
Do you ever find it like hard to switch back and forth between working three-dimensionally and then kind of bouncing back to the two-dimensional work?
They kind of happen side by side, and sometimes the 2D stuff goes well and quickly, and other times I'll work on a painting forever and it's just ugh. And then you make the sculpture and it's like, no, that's so much better. And it's so much more interesting. And it's so much bigger. And it's, like this thing here in the picture here is made out of a failed plywood drawing. It just kept getting uglier and uglier and uglier. And it just became better as a thing than as a flat image.
Yeah, I love the process of just you reusing things and just put it into something else, which probably makes it, I mean, obviously it makes it better in the long run. The other question I had, like, then I'm going to jump into all the other questions. So you do, like, your work really references, I mean, you talked about skateboarding, like I grew up skating, like that's been like the one constant in my life. And like, there's a lot of like that graffiti culture in that.
Yeah.
And I really see a lot of that in your work. Is that something you look at or has kind of influenced you at all? Or is it just just happen. And it really does read as like that type of street art on some of the pieces with how you're drawing in on them and stuff.
Yes, yes. Now, I wouldn't say I'm super into graffiti in the sense that I like graffiti style. You know what I mean? That's not ever really been my thing. But I've always liked seeing and making marks. And I know it sounds so simple, but like, you put a mark on something. It's like, I was here, I did this. You do it in school when you're a kid, you get in trouble for it. But, later in life, you work that in your, my grandparents' house where they marked all the kids' heights along one wall. And those marks, the evidence of those marks were there for years and years and years. So not graffiti in the same way as,
Like layering. I mean, it's kind of like layering of
mark
things.
making, some graffiti. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think graffiti kind of falls in that realm. So you have this I think it's the best when it's on like random things, and then it starts rusting or something, and then you get the layers. It's like, I'm not a big graffiti person either, but like I appreciate layering. Yeah, it's just kind of like the different information, I guess, coming through on different things. It's kind of an interesting aspect, and your work has a ton of that going on.
And I like it when they try and paint over it and they try and match the color, but it's not really the color. And it's actually more noticeable that you've painted it the wrong color concrete.
Oh yeah, like the whiteout. They just white out over it, and then
things have been whited out.
And then it's just another layer. Then, over time, will the other layer kind of come through? Like, with all my work, I think about building those layers of surface, and like it's all kind of plays in that same realm of things. And I think I don't know, there's a lot of raw wood in your work, which is really nice. You got the glue running through things. There's kind of a lot happening in these pieces, which is great. You've got the process coming through. Again, you have the weird functionality aspect of things that happens within your work, even though it's not functional, but you're like, ooh, what does this thing do? There's so much happening in them that I think is really wonderful. And definitely, if you've never seen Travis's work in person, I can't recommend enough to like see one of the shows so you can really explore these pieces a little bit more.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I'm going to jump right in. So we have you ever had a spoken word artist or a dancer react to one of your pieces?
No. There was a faculty member who had their students in creative writing use my work as prompts, an exhibition on mark as a prompt for an assignment. But no, nothing like that. But that could be cool. I'd be down with that.
I would love to see what prompts you get out of your work. And, just because it really is, it takes people's imagination, I think, and I'm sure people assign these things all sorts of weird, like, oh, this is a tool for this,
Yeah.
Which is probably like a really fun thing I love just to hear what I love like when you have a gallery show and like you creep behind people and you watch them put their stories on your work and you're like, oh yeah, that's way better than I thought.
Nice. It's more interesting that way than just hearing, oh, I love it, it's great. It's like, well, that's not very much fun.
Yeah, I think narrative work has a tendency to do that, to take people down their own route of their own experiences, which is really great about narrative work. That's why I think a lot of people are drawn to it. That's why I'm drawn to it. It's easy to be like, oh, this is what I imagine this to be, because God only knows what happened in my life that'll, put those beliefs on you.
Yeah, true.
I think that's probably why I'm drawn to your work so much, because it has a lot of those elements in it. I'm not much of like a traditional, I guess, like just like here's a piece on a pedestal, like formal work, I guess, like that doesn't really do it for me as much as like I love the stories. I love the imagination that comes behind making artwork.
Yeah. And I do. I've always liked seeing process drawings. Like you might see someone's, like you might, and this sometimes happens with, all kinds of people. They're nice people. You think their work's very interesting, but then you see their sketchbook. You see these things in progress, and it allows you to, really get insight into how they see the world. And so I'm trying to leave those clues in the quote unquote finished work. So
I mean,
hopefully,
you had your professor tell you that your studio is more interesting than your finished work,
yeah.
which
And
is all like a giant sketch happening. So,
Yeah. And I've said that to students too before, where, you have these cool conversations, you're looking at their sketchbooks or all this stuff that they're really interested in. And then they'll show you this like kind of traditional landscape. And you're like, oh, but we just had this really weird conversation over here about all this other stuff. I wonder if you can get that into your work.
yeah. All right. So, where are you currently based? Are you teaching? I know we've talked about this a little bit. This is a question we had from someone.
Okay. Yeah, I live in Lexington, Kentucky. My wife and I moved to Kentucky years ago when she got a college teaching position. She runs the metals and jewelry area at Eastern Kentucky University. And for a long time, I taught at EKU. And then this year, I'll start as a high school teacher at a nearby high school. So we'll see how that goes. So yeah, I teach. Years ago, I tried the booth thing when I was a resident artist at Penland, doing the Philadelphia Furniture Show and things like that. And I realized after one of those that, no, I'm not one of those people who can do the booth fairs. Although I have friends who do it quite well. That's not me. And then I was not making a lot of stuff very quickly. So, and plus I like teaching. So that sort of takes the stress off of what you're making in the studio if you're not worried about that it has to sell to pay your mortgage. So, so I very much like teaching. I like being around young people making art. I mean, they're my favorite people to hang out with. So
I think high school students are going to love you. I mean, I would love that. If I was in high school, I'd be thrilled to have you for a teacher. So
thanks. That'll be new. So that just starts next month. So we'll see.
yeah, well, I'm going to definitely have to talk to you about it and see how that's going. So
I assume it'll go well, but it's an interesting change. So I'm looking forward.
Yeah. What kind of materials do you use for your paintings? We had a question about, is there any encaustic on like the board? Because you do get so many layers kind of build up on kind of those paintings that you're doing.
Yeah, not so much encaustic, although I can see why you might think that. Globby chunks of acrylic, pencil, graphite pencil, colored pencil, spray paint. On some of the, let's see, I don't know how far back it is. Oh, it might be too far back. But on some of the ones farther back, I'd really build up the gessoed surface and sand back through the layers. So yeah, it looks a lot in a way like an effect you might get with encaustic, but it's mostly acrylic.
Great. So I'm gonna have one last question just because Touchstone's putting this on. It sounds like you've had like a pretty big influence from craft schools. I know you said kind of in between, before you went to grad school, you went to, was it Peters Valley that you had your first experience, and kind of how that really influenced you to kind of keep pursuing forward. So, I mean, what are the good things about craft schools and kind of what they offer to people?
Well, and I'm often telling my students this, I'll say, oh, sign up for a workshop. You'll probably get some sort of scholarship. And they're like, well, I don't need more school. I don't want more school. I'm like, it's different. It's different. It's different. It's not the same. And I tell them how, you don't get a grade. It's not for the grade. It's for this experience. But for me, I felt like, you studied with your teachers in undergrad and they gave me lots. I'm not complaining one bit. But somehow when you step out of that environment, you think, oh, what do I do now? And then you meet a whole new set of people and they link up to other, you learn different techniques or philosophies, or you meet other people, you visit them in their schools or whatever. And it just like doubles and triples your circle, let alone learning any new techniques, right? It just allows you to give you this circle. And I've felt that the biggest thing that has kept me motivated throughout my life as an artist has been other artists. And so being around other artists, having that kind of inspiration at places like you just mentioned, right? They're really great for these places because they're sometimes a week, sometimes 2 weeks, and usually not that expensive, or you can get a scholarship if you're like a student, allows for this other kind of activity to happen, where out of your normal zone, you're not getting a grade, and you can really allow, it's just, for me, it's sort of my favorite environment to be in, making art. Even teaching art too, because you're there with students and they're not there worried about a grade. You're not taking attendance. You're there because it's this sort of pure experience of hanging out with other artists. So I find, I find that to be sort of my favorite places to be honest, my favorite places.
Great. Yeah, I fully agree with you. I love craft schools. I mean, I met you through one of them.
Yeah.
So it's like those connections you meet, and oh god, yeah. Again, these have been really, really great because at Touchstone we've had no classes this summer, which is like the time. I mean, I think everybody that worked that is on this call right now would say like that is the time that we live for the summer when we have our workshops and our campus is lively, and you have that great community of people coming together and with a similar interest. It's like such a wonderful experience, and I love that you kind of hit on that, and that was the time that it switched. I remember my first time I went to do something like that, I was terrified, and then you show up and you're like, oh, you got this community of amazing people that most probably still friends with today. So
yeah, I know. I agree 100%. And
yeah, I mean, Lindsay, who was our director, was in the picture from your first time there, which is amazing. So,
well, she had been at Peters Valley the previous summer, or maybe even, the previous summer, or maybe 2 summers previous. And so, she was more organized than me, right? So she went there and then came back and talked about it. And so I was like, wow. And so then I went there one summer as a studio assistant and spent the whole summer there. And then from there, I heard about all these other things you could do. And it made me realize, oh, I could apply for residency at this place. So the year and a half between undergrad and grad, I kind of freeloaded at Peters Valley. Not freeloaded, but, met people. I did a residency in Vermont. I spent the whole summer and then plus another month or so at Peters Valley in the off season, and then went down to Penland for a few weeks. And all those things just kind of opened things up, the whole possibility. And then I was able to enter grad school with a lot of confidence. It was a really great time. And what I'm always telling my students, it's like at the time, and my wife and I mention this a lot, how we're so stressed out about money and are we going to have this career? And now it's like, oh man, those are so great. Those times we forget, oh yeah, we're stressed out tonight. But at the time, looking back, it's so perfect. It's like everything's in flux. You're with your friends all day long in the studio. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, definitely, I'm going to wrap this up, and thank you for coming out. I loved hearing you talk about your work. It's great to see you. So thanks for giving us a talk, and I'm sure it seems like everybody is thrilled with your work. Again, if you haven't seen his work in person and you get the opportunity to, I can't recommend it enough. Definitely big thanks to Touchstone for making these things happen and being able to bring, this is a small part of the arts community that we're able to bring together for these, and I am so thankful that we have these. These keep me motivated in the studios. I hope this keeps everybody else happy and gives you something to look forward to. Next week we do have Marlene True, who's going to be on here, who is a metalsmith, small metals worker out of North Carolina. She's actually the director of Pocosin School of Arts. So be sure to tune into that because that should be a great experience. And thank you all for coming out. If you want to hang out for a second, you're more than welcome. So thank y'all, and y'all have a good night.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. And yeah, hang out if you want to ask more questions.